I had a dream, I dreamt that I had died. And there was just complete blackness, complete nothingness.
When you woke up, how did you feel?
Well, I thought, is that death?
Welcome to a new series of Money Confidential with me, Katie Morley. Each episode, I head across the country to hear directly from you, lifting the curtain on real-life dramas and delving into stories of financial deception, disputes, and strained relationships. Today, we confront one of our biggest fears, our own mortality. Our listener Catherine contacted us because she has £200,000 to give away. But her anxiety means she can't face making decisions about it or making a will. She emailed me earlier this year.
Dear Katie, I have £200,000 from savings and the sale of my house in 2007. I haven't done anything with it, it just depreciates. I am now 67, still working part-time, 0 contract hours as a nurse. I rent as an assured tenant. The moral question is, what should I do with the money? It's not doing any good. I have 3 close relatives and have thought to give half the money to them and half to different charities now, before I die, so I will not have to leave a will. The problem is, I keep putting the decision off. The indecision is making me unwell.
It sounds like Catherine has a lot to grapple with. So I hopped on the tube and went to meet her in East London. To understand where her attitude to money came from, I asked Catherine to start at the beginning.
I was born in South London, East Dulwich. My father was a piano tuner and my mother was a nurse, but sadly the marriage wasn't a happy one. The breakup of the marriage really has definitely affected my attitude to money.
In what way?
We lost the house. We were just an ordinary family in a 3-bedroom house and, a school up the road and so on. And because it was in my father's name, my father kept the house and there was a row and so on. We just left the house suddenly. So we left with nothing and that's how we lived.
How old are you when this happened?
About 6 or 7, something around that age, yes. So I think that's made me aware that you had to rely on yourself, that you couldn't rely on anyone else. And I think it was a big lesson really, because with parents you assume that they will look after you and so on. So
where did you go with your mother?
Initially we went to the police station and then they found us that they used to be hostels for homeless people. When my brother contracted dysentery, so we went from a nice kind of normal existence really to living in this one room in this hostel, which was very strange. My mother tried to carry on nursing, which must have been very difficult for her.
You were essentially nomadic, going from hostel to hostel.
Yes.
For how long? How long did that go on?
For about 3 years. We moved. But eventually we were given a council house in East End of London, and that's how we ended up in the East End of London. But living on a council flat, a council estate, was very different from living in a house in East Dulwich. But anyway, so that really coloured my attitude to money.
This traumatic experience had a profound effect on Catherine.
And I vowed then never to get married, because I wanted my independence, because I knew if things went wrong, I can only blame myself and not anyone else.
And you have done that, haven't you?
And I have done that,
successful career as a nurse, but you have never married or had children.
No.
After selling a house in 2007, Catherine amassed savings of £200,000. But her reluctance to deal with money has left it languishing in savings accounts. Now she's contemplating retirement and can't decide what to do with it.
I don't want to waste it. My mother was trying to bring up 3 children on a nurse's salary, and the nurse's salary then was very low. So as a child, we always went to jumble sales. We never bought new clothes. If we could walk, we walked. There used to be lots of markets. We would go and pick the fruit and the veg after the market had finished. So everything that had been thrown out, not particularly pleasant to go and that's how we survived. So I've always been quite careful, too careful in some ways.
Yeah, and it seems like you're sort of, some of these things that making you hold back are potentially now blocking you from sort of actually making a decision about what you will do with this money. That's where would like to try and help you. You just sort of make your own mind up about this by helping you think about things perhaps in a different way. Or you've got 3 close relatives that you are considering leaving some of the money to.
I will, certainly.
Can you tell me about them?
They're my sister's children, 2 girls, and also my great niece.
Do you think it would make you happy to think of them inheriting the money one day?
Yes, definitely. It would be wrong for me not to leave them any money. I'm always worried about people wasting money. But then if you give it to them, then it's up to them what they do with it.
What would be your idea of wasting money?
That's a good point.
It's valid, whatever you think it is.
I suppose buying things that they think are going to make them happy, and they don't. So, the younger of the 2 will buy, I don't know, a £300 bag or something, and then it'll be lying on the floor, and she'll find another one to buy, so...
I totally understand, and you don't want to think of your hard-earned money lying on the floor. Yeah, exactly. That's completely understandable.
But,
there's so many options out there, aren't there? I mean, you mentioned that you were also looking at various charities potentially.
Yes, I've got 5 or 6 going, I think, which I give regularly to. But I haven't increased that for a long time, whereas actually I could increase the amount that I give. So I would want to look at the charities and think I'd like to perhaps give them equal amounts. Yeah.
But is it maybe because there's so many out there?
Definitely.
That it's a bit overwhelming almost to make that final cut.
And also when I use money, sometimes I do think, I that could have gone to a charity.
Catherine's not only overwhelmed by choice of where the money should go, she's also struggling with something much bigger, her own mortality.
Well, I do believe in an afterlife, but what that afterlife is going to be like, I don't know. I'm assuming it may be this, that or the other, but that's what worries me, really, what comes after. And I suppose it is the fear of the unknown. And because you're settled, by and large, is what's going to happen the next day and the next day and the next day. But an afterlife, you haven't experienced it. It's completely out of one's real, the whole idea of eternity. I mean, that's shocking in a way.
Yeah. Have you sort of discussed these fears with anyone at the church?
No, I haven't. And I had a dream. I dreamt that I had died. And there was just complete blackness, complete nothingness, absolutely complete nothingness. It was very strange.
And
very
you felt
strange.
this in the dream?
I felt this in the dream, yes.
How long ago was this?
Relatively recently.
And what were your feelings around, like, when you woke up, how did you feel?
Well, I thought, is that death? There was a sense of absolute nothingness, whereas, of course, it wasn't absolute nothingness because I was sensing it. So it's very difficult to explain, really. But there was that sense that there was absolutely nothing, absolutely. And it was completely black. So even with eyes wide open, there was just complete blackness.
Catherine, this is clearly weighing on your mind.
Yes,
it strikes me that you're still young and you don't need to be, this is not around the corner, I wouldn't have thought. But I'd love to find some people that can like truly help you in this journey of what to, deciding what to do. It's difficult for you, isn't it? Is this the first time you've really spoken to anyone about
it is, yes, it is, yeah.
How does it feel to actually be talking about it out loud?
Well, it's been very helpful, really, and it's made me think about getting things in order, which I suppose you do as you get older. And although 67 doesn't sound particularly old, it is in other ways. And also, you don't know what will happen in the future.
Do you feel proud of the fact that you've built this big pot up?
Well, yes and no, because in a way, no, because I haven't used it, and yes, because it can be used. It's strange, really, and also because for so many years we didn't have any money.
Catherine's story is one that many of us will relate to. There's a reason why half the adult population hasn't made a will. Confronting our own eventual demise is one of the hardest things we will ever do as humans. But I want to help Catherine address these fears so she can get on and deal with her finances, which are clearly stressing her out. I'm interested in your thoughts. Have you plucked up the courage to make a will? Did you struggle to decide who to leave what to? Have you got any advice for Catherine? Email me on moneyconfidential@telegraph.co.uk or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. The number's in the podcast description. After the break, we speak to Professor Sheldon Solomon about Catherine's fear of death and finding a healthier way to tackle it. Back in a tick. Welcome back to Money Confidential with me, Katie Morley. Now, when Catherine first reached out, she told us she wanted help with making a will and deciding who to leave her money to. But when I sat down to talk to her, it really struck me that an intense anxiety around death is a major block to her getting this done. So, before even thinking about making a will, I decided that although it was going to be heavy, we needed to take a step back and first tackle her greatest fear. I thought, who better to bring into the conversation than Sheldon Solomon? He's a psychology professor at Skidmore College in New York and author of The Worm at the Core on the Role of Death in Life, amid other world-renowned books on how we think about death. He gave me his thoughts on Catherine's situation.
In my opinion, you were the stimulus when you spoke in terms of a final cut. You were talking about charities and trying to decide which ones might be best to pass resources off. And I really do think that the wording of those two words, final cut, what she then got to next was her concern about death as this overriding nothingness.
Yeah, it's interesting how you picked up on those words, final cut.
Yes.
It's actually quite scary when you sort of nail it down like that.
Yeah.
I wanted to rewind slightly from her, who shall I give the money to, and just tackle first, with your assistance, her fear of death. I think one of the things that hit me the hardest was her talking about this really wild dream that she'd had. She is a member of the Catholic Church. She is a Christian and she believes in the afterlife. But she had this dream where she had died and she was in this vast expanse of nothingness. And she was terrified. She felt so alone. What do you make of this?
Well, it's the essence of the human condition, is the way that we individually come to terms with the fact that we are rather unique amongst all forms of life, in that we are painfully and poignantly aware of the transient nature of our existence, way back in childhood, even in situations where our lives are not threatened.
So we all have this innate fear of death, I think, don't we?
Yes.
But to varying degrees.
I do think it's important that whether we're aware of it or not, all of us as human beings are smart enough to know that we're here, and that makes us also smart enough to know that we won't always be here, that we can die at any moment. for reasons that we could never anticipate or control. And because of that, what existential psychologists argue is that we embrace culturally constructed views of the world that give us a sense of reality and instill in us a sense of meaning and purpose. And so all human beings, to varying degrees, spend most of our lives trying to maintain a sense that life has meaning and that we have value, basically in the service of minimizing death anxiety. And this is important for some folks like Catherine. The traumatic experiences of her early days, Annie, it is pretty much a recipe for chronic psychological dis-ease. Put a hyphen between dis and ease. I'm not suggesting that this is a medical problem, so much as that for folks like Catherine, thoughts of death are on our mind rather constantly in light of having been abandoned as a child and always on the cusp of not having enough to live day to day. I see her at the same time also going in the direction that some folks call death acceptance, where you are in a rare and enviable position of being able to step back and revise or refine your sense of what it means to be alive and what's important to you. And we become more concerned with our relationships and our experiences than our possessions. And we just become happily situated in the present with a hopeful eye on the future. And that's, I also see plenty of that in Catherine's concerns.
So hang on. Are you saying that you actually think she's further down this journey than she even realizes towards acceptance of death?
Yes, I do. Now, that doesn't mean that this is particularly pleasant. So there is the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. He said, look, we don't need to like anxiety. Again, I always call it dis-ease. But he was like, yeah, but anxiety can have multiple functions. It's obvious that anxiety is unpleasant and that often we try to circumvent it as rapidly as possible with pills or distractions. On the other hand, Kierkegaard said something along the lines that anxiety is yourself calling yourself to find yourself.
So at what point, I mean, Catherine's described being on a really quite painful journey. She's had this terrible dream.
Yeah.
But on the same token, you're saying that she may be further on in this journey than she realizes. She's reached out to us for help, which feels like a big step.
Yes.
When's she going to start feeling better about all this?
Yeah, hopefully in the not too distant future, which is, of course, I wish I had something more precise to offer. I thought this was a magnificent conversation as a wonderful example of somebody who I believe is on the cusp of a remarkably positive transformation by virtue of her willingness to even engage, to even talk thoughtfully and honestly about these matters. But it does raise the question of how do we become more comfortable ensconced in our bodies in the context of the reality of the human condition.
Do you think that she will feel more comfortable when she's actually, the act of making the will may lead her to feel more comfortable?
I do. You just find being alive to be awesome. And it's humbling, not in a self-deprecating way, but you just realize that, yeah, you're a little microscopic dot who's here for an infinitesimal amount of time. And then you might not be around at all thereafter, but that doesn't matter. You are still connected to everything that's ever been here and everything that'll be here when you're no longer. And that just makes people grateful. If you were lucky enough to sleep in a bed and have lunch today, then we have a lot to feel good about. And okay, how do we know if one is making progress in this direction? And Erik Erikson, who was a psychologist of yesteryear, he said, look, I know if people are managing their concerns about death in an effective fashion by just asking 3 questions. One is, does life have meaning? And the more we accept the fact that we're transient entities, the more life feels meaningful. And then if you ask people, well, okay, if you could live again, who would you want to be? People that are miserable, they're like anybody but me. I want to be Jesus or Lady Gaga or just anybody. But folks that are doing well, they're like, no, I'd like, if I could do this again, I want to be me. And then finally, you can just ask people, all right, how are you feeling about death right now? Some folks are like, I am angry and terrified at the prospect of dying, the existential nothingness that Catherine referred to. And I think all of us have had that sense at times. But there are other times they say, of course, I'm apprehensive about death. But I also happily accept that I am a creature who will die someday as a perfectly reasonable price to pay for the magnificent joy and privilege of having been alive in the first place. Just my final thought is what an amazing human being. It takes remarkable courage to engage in these matters with the degree of thought and honesty that she has.
Many thanks to Professor Sheldon Solomon. That was a really thought-provoking conversation. Now, on a lighter note, Catherine's jaw will drop to the floor as I'm about to show her how she can grow her savings by an extra £8,000 a year in just 5 minutes and a few clicks of a mouse. Because on this show, we don't just hear your problems, we try our best to solve them with top experts and honest, practical advice. I've been looking into Catherine's finances, and her money is languishing in a savings account with an interest rate of just 1%, which is pitiful in today's climate. I did a quick search on moneyfacts.co.uk and have found her a much better deal. By moving her money to Ulster Bank's Loyalty Saver Easy Access account, she could get 5.2% interest, which translates to an extra £8,400 in annual savings. Not bad for 5 minutes work. So, on to a will. As Sheldon said, it seems like Catherine might be emotionally further ahead in this process than she first thought. So when she feels ready, she can crack on. In terms of practical advice, Gary Rycroft is the man for the job. He's a solicitor and the Telegraph's resident Ask a Lawyer columnist. I asked him what Catherine should do next.
First and foremost, I would say a massive congratulations to Catherine for scrimping and saving and getting this pot of money. And in my view, it would be entirely mad for her to get rid of that money now. She's worked hard to build it up. And like most people who are saving for a rainy day, saving for retirement, and in fact, many people don't do as well as Catherine at that task. It is there for that purpose, isn't it? It is there to provide her with comfort in her older years. And as I'm sure we might explore soon, because of her family situation, she hasn't got a lot of people around. So actually, she needs to look after number one. She doesn't know what her future needs might be in terms of social care. Obviously, we have free healthcare under the NHS, but we don't have free social care. In my own particular column with the Telegraph, Katie, sometimes readers kind of flag up this issue of, well, some people never save anything and they get their care paid for. And my response to that is, well, actually, they might get their care paid for, but it's in a place probably not of their choosing. In Catherine's case, if she's got her own pot of money, if she needs care in the future, she'd be what I call a self-funder. So she would go into hopefully a care home of her choice, subject to it being available, but she would be getting the care and the best possible care that she deserves for her old age. So keep hold of that money, Catherine. Please, please, please keep hold of it. If you're finding it a burden, maybe take some professional advice from an independent financial advisor, someone regulated, of course, to take that burden away. But you need that money to fund your old age and to be a security blanket for you. So view it as a security blanket, not as a burden.
So we're saying, Catherine, put yourself first. Don't,
yes,
for goodness sake, give the money away now.
Yes.
You know, hang on to it. But it is stressing her out. I think part of the process of unstressing her and making a plan is making a will, isn't it? How does she go about doing this?
The first point with making a will is to find someone to help you to do it, to hold your hand, basically, through the process.
And does that need to be a sort of qualified solicitor?
Well, look, I am a qualified solicitor, so of course I'm speaking from a position of bias in that sense. But let me be straight with you, Katie. Making a will isn't the biggest kind of bill that I ever put in any given month. It's relatively cheap in terms of legal work.
So for someone like Catherine, how much roughly would we be talking about to make the will?
I'd have thought for someone like Catherine, she'd be talking under £500 to make a will.
Okay.
And I think that's really good value for money in terms of giving her peace of mind.
What would she be getting for that then? Would that be like a consultation, sitting down, deciding who to give the money to, actually drawing up the will and naming the beneficiaries? And I think what seems to be really important for her is making sure that the beneficiaries actually do end up getting the money. I think one of her biggest fears is that she will make this will and then what she has said that she wanted does not get executed.
Let me be really clear. I think using a qualified and regulated provider of legal services is the best way to go. A solicitor is qualified and regulated. There are other types of lawyer who have kind of a type of regulation. Will writers will say that they are regulated, but it's a voluntary regulation. They're not regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and they don't always have to have qualifications. I don't want to get inundated with complaints from will writers, so I'm going to say that there are some good will writers out there, but there are some that aren't that good either. The same applies to solicitors. So I think find a regulated provider of legal services. There are some kind of badges of honour, if you will, which I think are good to look out for. So a solicitor who's a member of the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, STEP, that's a specialist group. A solicitor who is a member of the Law Society Private Client Section, and a solicitor who is a member of what used to be called Solicitors for the Elderly, and I think it's now called Lifelong Advisors or something like that. The other great thing to do is actually word of mouth, to be honest, is actually speaking to someone that's made a will already and had a good experience. And also that you can ask them how much they paid for it. So find someone that is regulated and experienced. Now, the next question you asked, Katie, was, well, what can you expect for paying that fee? So there's the consultation, drawing up a legal document, and then overseeing that being signed properly and witnessed, and therefore ending up with a valid document. Now, there are more than one way. My personal preference for making wills is to see someone in person, because you get to look them in the eye, you can get a handle on them, they can get a handle on you, and I think you can have a better conversation.
Catherine has mentioned to me that she is worried that if she gives this money to her relatives, her younger relatives in particular, that they might fritter it away on handbags, which they then leave on the floor and don't look after. Is there any way that she can, in her will, suggest or dictate how her relatives spend the money that she has bequeathed them?
Don't feel compelled to do something because you think it's the right thing to do or because it's convention. And what I mean by that really is leaving your money to relatives that perhaps you don't know very well, or relatives that you are concerned might not appreciate the gift. So I would really say step back and be really honest and truthful about what you want to happen to your money, really, deep down, really, what would you like to do with it? It might well be that you want your relatives to have it, and that is great. But it might be that you want it to be spread out a bit wider amongst friends or people that have really made a difference to you, friends or neighbours that are there for you, that support you day in, day out, or charities or organisations that you've got a lot of benefit from in one way or another during your lifetime.
I think this is such important advice, Gary, because it really, it's almost like taking a step back from it all, isn't it?
Yes.
From the obligation and the societal norm that you would give this to whichever relatives were closest to you by blood or marriage.
I think said two very key things there, Katie, which is the obligation that people feel and the societal norm that people feel that they're under. And I think they are very compelling emotions. But as I think we're both saying, step back from that and actually think, what do I want to do? Because Catherine, like you've said, has built this pot up. She's worked hard. And so she absolutely should decide what she genuinely wants to do with it. And if she looks hard at herself, it might be a different outcome from the one she's talking about now.
Yeah.
Having said all of that, Katie, if she does decide that she wants to give it to the relatives, there are two answers to give to that question. Well, can she restrict what they do with it? The legal, technical answer is yes, you can. You can create a trust. But in reality, that's not very practical. And I would say, genuinely, don't try and control things from the grave. If you are going to give a gift, give it freely. Now, there are some very good reasons to have a trust arrangement, and the primary one is to protect people who are vulnerable. So, classically, children who are under the age of 18. My own view is that children shouldn't have any money until they're about 25, seriously. And the other vulnerable issue is, people that have health issues and especially perhaps mental health issues. But if it's just, I don't think I'll like what they'll spend the money on, frankly, I think we are in that position of stepping back and thinking, are these the right people?
Yeah, it's not a designer handbag prevention fund,
exactly.
Is it? No.
Exactly.
Okay, it sounds like that may not be the road she should be going down here. But, could there be a kind of halfway house situation? So if she did go into a solicitor's office and have the chat and say, I want to give it to X, Y, and Z, could she put a kind of note in there saying, look, it's up to you what you do with the money, but I would like to see you spend it on education or a house deposit or whatever?
I agree with you entirely, and that is a device that we do often deploy. But yes, do what I call a letter of wishes, where you say exactly those things, Katie, which is, look, I'm giving you this money. I really hope that you will use it to further your education, to have a house deposit, have a great holiday, or, whatever you think is appropriate, and just to steer people in the right direction. It's not legally binding, but again, in my experience, it can be legally compelling.
I think it could be quite a powerful way of getting a message to somebody and having like a positive influence on their life, which I think is ultimately what she is wanting to have. So food for thought for Catherine there.
Definitely.
Gary, thank you so much. You've delivered us some excellent practical advice there. And, we've talked about some of the big questions of life too, haven't we?
We have indeed. It's been absolutely great to talk to you.
Many thanks to Gary Rycroft for sharing his legal wisdom with us. Catherine's dilemma is a big one, and I hope that we've been able to help her with some philosophical and practical advice. Thinking about the end of life is difficult, but unfortunately, it is something we all have to face eventually. Is there something you want to get off your chest? Email me at moneyconfidential@telegraph.co.uk or fill in the form via the link below. It takes about 60 seconds and can be totally anonymous. Thank you for listening to Money Confidential. Please do help grow the show by rating on your podcast app and leaving a nice review. You can find me on Instagram at moneybackmorley. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Briggs. Sound design and mixing by Elliot Lampert, and the series producer is Giles Gear. Ta-ta for now, sausage!
Please note, this deal was available as of September 30th, but rates may change.